He was just a single dad delivering food to the wrong address. What he didn't know was that the woman who answered the door was a lonely billionaire, and that simple mistake was about to change both of their lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching? From the rain began as a whisper, a soft tapping against the minivan's cracked windshield before turning into a steady drumming that blurred the world. Outside, into streaks of gray and neon, Leo gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, not from the weather, but from the quiet, gnawing anxiety that had become a permanent resident in his chest. The gaslight had been on for the last 10 miles. A blinking orange beacon of his reality beside him in the passenger seat. His 8-year-old daughter, Maya, hummed a tuneless song, her breath fogging a small circle on the window. She was drawing a lopsided heart with her fingertip completely oblivious to the weight pressing down on her father's shoulders. This was their third food delivery of the night, and the pay barely covered the gas it took to get here. Another 5 deliveries, and maybe they'd have enough for tomorrow's groceries. And the overdue electric bill that sat folded in his glove compartment, a stark, white reminder of how close they were to the edge. Maya looked over her bright eyes, cutting through the gloom of the car. "Daddy, are we almost there?" Her voice was a small anchor in the storm of his thoughts. "Yeah, kiddo, just a few more minutes." He forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as tired as it felt. The address on his phone led them away from the city's familiar grid of convenience stores and laundromats, into a neighborhood where the houses sat farther apart, hidden behind towering gates and long winding driveways. He slowed the minivan, the engine sputtering in protest as he navigated a street lined with manicured hedges that looked more like green walls. The final destination was a mansion, a word that felt too small for the sprawling stone and glass structure that loomed at the end of a private lane. It wasn't warm or inviting. It looked like a fortress built to keep the world out, not welcome it in. Leo pulled to a stop at the gate, his headlights illuminating a sleek black intercom panel. He checked the address again. Then the name on the delivery slip, a single initial V. It felt wrong, all of it. This wasn't the kind of place that ordered a single bag of takeout from a downtown noodle shop, but the app insisted this was it. He pressed the button. The silence that followed was so complete it felt heavier than the rain he was about to turn away. Assume it was a prank or a glitch in the system. When the massive iron gates swung open without a sound inviting him into a world he didn't belong in, the driveway was longer than his entire block, paved in smooth, dark stone that made the minivan's worn tires seem impossibly loud. Leo parked near the entrance, a sprawling archway lit by soft, recessed lights that made the rain dance like diamonds on the pavement. He grabbed the bag of food, its warmth already fading, and took a deep breath before stepping out into the cold. Maya watched him from the car, her face pressed against the window, a small, worried crease between her brows. He gave her a quick thumbs up, a silent promise. He'd be right back. The front door was a solid slab of dark wood, imposing and silent. He knocked once, then twice, his knuckles rapping against the cold surface with a sound that felt swallowed by the sheer size of the house. He waited, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The rain soaking through his thin jacket, he was about to give up, to leave the food on the doorstep and mark it as delivered. When the door opened, a sliver of warm, golden light spilled out onto the wet stone, and in it stood a woman. She wasn't what he expected. She was tall and slender. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy knot at the nape of her neck, and she wore a simple silk robe that looked like it cost more than his rent. But it was her eyes that held him. They were wide and searching, filled with a profound loneliness that seemed to echo the emptiness of the house behind her. She looked at him, not like a delivery driver, but like a ghost who had appeared at her door unannounced. "I have a delivery for V," he said, his voice sounding rougher than he intended. She blinked as if the words took a moment to register. "Oh," she said softly. I didn't order anything. Leo felt a familiar sinking feeling in his stomach, a mix of frustration and exhaustion. He pulled out his phone to show her the screen, but as he did, he noticed her face was pale, her hands were trembling slightly, and she was leaning against the doorframe, as if for support. "Are you okay?" he asked the question, slipping out before he could stop it. She looked surprised by his concern. Her gaze flickered from the food in his hand to his face. And, for a moment, something other than loneliness surfaced in her eyes. Confusion, maybe, or a flicker of something he couldn't name. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was thin, unconvincing. Leo looked at the bag of food, then back at her. He thought of Maya, waiting in the car, of the gas money this trip had cost, of the hours they had left to work. But he also saw the deep shadows under the woman's eyes, the way she seemed to be holding herself together with a fragile thread. He made a decision, one that his wallet would protest, but his conscience couldn't hear. He said, holding out the bag, "You should have it." She stared at him, baffled. "But I didn't pay for it. It's on me," Leo said with a shrug. "Consider it a happy accident." She opened her mouth to argue, but he was already turning away. "Just eat something," he called over his shoulder before jogging back to his minivan through the rain. He didn't look back, but he could feel her eyes on him, a silent question mark in the vast empty silence of her perfect polished world. He slid back into the driver's seat, the cold of his wet jacket seeping into the worn fabric of the chair. Maya looked at him, her expression a mixture of curiosity and relief. Did she like the food? He started the engine, letting its familiar rumble ground him. "Yeah, kiddo, I think she needed it more than we did." He pulled the minivan away from the mansion, its golden lights shrinking in to his rearview mirror until they were just another starless point in the rainy night. He didn't know who she was, or why she looked so lost in her own home. All he knew was that for a brief moment their two worlds had collided, and he had chosen kindness. Over a few desperately needed dollars, he hoped it was the right choice. Saraphina Vance stood in the doorway long after the minivan's taillights had disappeared into the rain. The paper bag in her hands was still warm. Its weight, a tangible reminder of the strange brief encounter, the scent of noodles and broth curled into the cold air of the marble foyer, a scent that didn't belong here amidst the polished stone and silent abstract art. She closed the door, the heavy thud echoing through the cavernous space. She hadn't had a visitor in weeks. Not a real one. Her assistant came and went, leaving color-coded binders on the kitchen island. Her security detail patrolled the grounds, their presence felt, but never seen. But a person, a stranger, who looked at her and saw, not a name, but a human being, that hadn't happened in a very long time. She walked through the silent house, her bare feet cold against the floor. She would ding ANTNA. Past the formal dining room with its table set for 12, a room that hadn't hosted a dinner in over a year. She passed the library, with its floor-to-ceiling shelves of books she'd never had time to read. She ended up in the kitchen, a sleek, sterile space of stainless steel and quartz countertops that a private chef used twice a week to stock her fridge. With meals she rarely ate, she set the bag on the island and slowly unpacked its contents. A simple container of soup, a side of steamed dumplings, a plastic fork wrapped in a thin paper napkin. It was the kind of food she used to eat in college late at night, huddled over textbooks in the library. It was real, unpretentious, honest. She stared at it for a long moment, her mind replaying the delivery driver's face, his tired eyes, his worn jacket, the calluses on the hand that had offered her the food without a second thought. He had looked at her with concern, not calculation. He hadn't recognized her. He hadn't tried to sell her something or ask for a favor. He had just seen a person who looked like she needed a meal, and he'd given it to her for free. A man who clearly didn't have much to spare had given it away. Without hesitation, the thought was so foreign, so completely outside the realm of her daily existence, that it made her chest ache with a feeling she couldn't name. She picked up the fork and took a bite of the noodles. They were lukewarm and a little salty. But as she ate them, standing alone in her vast, empty kitchen, Saraphina felt something shift inside her, a small flicker of warmth in a place that had been cold for far too long. She didn't know his name, but she knew she wouldn't forget his kindness. The next morning rose gray and damp. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low and heavy like a damp wool blanket. Leo woke before the sun, his back aching from another night, spent sleeping in the bark driver's seat. He'd pulled into a quiet truck stop after their last delivery, too exhausted to drive the hour back to the small apartment they could barely afford to rent. Maya was still asleep in the back, curled up under a pile of blankets, her small face peaceful in the dim light. He watched her for a moment, his heart swelling with a fierce, protective love that was both his greatest joy and his heaviest burden. She was the reason he kept going, the reason he pushed through the warn. Exhaustion, the worry, the constant fear of not being enough. He started the van, the engine turning over with a reluctant groan, and drove to a nearby diner, the kind with cracked vinyl. Booths and coffee, that was more bitter than bold. He counted the cash in his wallet, enough for 1 plate of pancakes for Maya to share, and 2 coffees, one for him, one to go for the road. She woke up as the smell of bacon and syrup filled the car, a slow, sleepy smile spreading across her face. They sat in the parking lot, eating out of a styrofoam container, sharing a single plastic fork. It wasn't the breakfast of champions, but for them it was a small moment of normalcy, a ritual that made their life on the road feel a little less transient. As Maya finished the last bite, her face sticky with syrup, she looked up at him, her expression. "Serious, Daddy? Are we going to find a new house soon?" Leo's smile tightened. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to find the right words. Words that were honest but not scary. "We're working on it, kiddo. Just saving up a little more first." She seemed to accept that her faith in him, absolute, unwavering. But the question lingered in the air between them, a quiet reminder of what they had lost and what he was so desperately trying to rebuild. He spent the rest of the day chasing deliveries, a blur of strip malls and office parks, the app on his place phone, a relentless taskmaster. Each accepted job was a few more dollars in their pocket, but it never felt like enough. By evening he was bone-tired, and the anxiety was back humming just beneath the surface. He pulled into a quiet, residential street to check his earnings for the day. And as he scrolled through the app, he saw a new order pop up, a delivery to a familiar address. On a winding private lane, an address he had sworn he wouldn't return to, but the payout was higher than usual. Almost triple the normal rate. It was too much to ignore. With a heavy sigh he accepted the job, turning the minivan back toward the stone and glass mansion and the woman with the lonely eyes. He hadn't been able to forget the gates to the estate were already open. This time a silent invitation that felt more like a summons. Leo drove up the long driveway, his palms sweating on the steering wheel. He didn't know what to expect, what this was about, but a part of him dreaded the answer. He parked the minivan in the same spot as before and walked to the front door, the bag of food feeling heavier in his hand than it had the night before. He knocked, and the door swung open almost immediately. Saraphina stood there again, this time dressed in tailored slacks and a simple cashmere sweater. She looked more composed. Today her hair was neat, her expression unreadable, but her eyes still held that same deep-seated sadness. "I believe this is for you," she said, her voice. Even he looked down at the bag in his hand, then back at her. "No, this is a delivery for V." She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "That's me, V, for Vance, Saraphina Vance." The name didn't register at first. It was just a name. But then he saw the flicker of recognition in his own mind. A headline from a business journal he'd glanced at weeks ago. A face on a magazine cover. In a waiting room. Saraphina Vance, the tech billionaire, the CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the world. He stared at her, his mind reeling. The woman he'd given a free meal. To the woman who looked so lost and alone, was one of the richest people on the planet. His first instinct was a hot flush of embarrassment, followed by a cold wave of suspicion. Was this some kind of game, a test, a story she would tell at a dinner party, about the naive delivery driver who felt sorry for a billionaire? "I should have told you last night," she said, her voice softer now. "But you looked at me like I was a person, not a headline, and I didn't want to break the spell." Leo didn't know what to say. He felt foolish and out of his depth, a small fish that had accidentally swum into a shark tank. He wanted to turn and walk away, to retreat to the familiar, predictable world of his minivan and his struggles. But then Maya's face flashed in his mind. Her hopeful smile, the quiet trust in her eyes. He couldn't afford to walk away. Not from a triple payout delivery. He took a slow breath and handed her the bag. "You paid for this one," he said, his voice tight. "So I'll leave it with you." She took the bag, her fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. The touch was electric, and it sent a jolt of something unfamiliar through him. "Wait," she said, as he turned to leave. "I'd like to talk to you for a moment, if you have time, please." Her use of the word please was what stopped him. It wasn't a command. It was a genuine request. And in her world, he suspected genuine requests were rare. He hesitated, then gave a slow, reluctant nod. "All right," he said, "but make it quick. I've got more deliveries to make." She led him inside, not into the grand foyer, but to a small sitting room off to the side. It was still opulent, with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked more like art than something you'd actually sit on. But it felt more intimate than the rest of the house. Fire crackled in a sleek, modern fireplace, and 2 armchairs faced each other. Invitingly, she motioned for him to sit, but he remained standing, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of his jacket. He felt like a trespasser, a stain on the pristine white carpet. "I wanted to thank you," she began, "for last night. It was a small thing, but it was the kindest thing anyone has done for me in a very long time." Leo shrugged. "Anyone would have done it." "No," she said, shaking her head. "They wouldn't. In my world, kindness always comes with an invoice. A favor owed a calculated return on investment. You asked for nothing. You didn't even know who I was." He looked around the room at the expensive art, the panoramic view of the city lights just beginning to twinkle in the dusk. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need to know why you did it." He frowned. "What do you mean, why I did it?" "You looked like you needed it. It was that simple." Saraphina studied him, her gaze intense and searching. "It's not simple," she said, "not to me. I'm surrounded by people all day long, and I've never felt more alone than I did last night. You saw that in the span of 30 seconds you saw something my own board of directors hasn't seen in 5 years, how the silence between them stretched thick with unspoken truths." Leo thought about his own life, the constant struggle, the sixteen scrated loneliness that crept in late at night after Maya was asleep. He understood what she meant, even if their worlds were galaxies apart. "Because I know what it feels like to be invisible," he said finally, his voice quiet but steady. "I know what it feels like to be in a room full of people, and feel like no one sees the real you." Her expression softened the polished mask of the CEO, slipping away to reveal the vulnerable woman he'd first seen on the doorstep. "Thank you," she whispered. Again. But this time, it wasn't for the food, it was for something more, something she hadn't realized she was starving for until he had shown up at her door. Understanding, he nodded, ready to leave. Now, but she stopped him again. "Stay," she said. "Have dinner with me. A real one. Not out of a paper bag." He hesitated, looking from her to the roaring fire, to the city lights beyond his world. Was the minivan, the diners, the truck stops, this was hers, a world of silk and stone, and he wasn't sure he was ready to step any further into it. "I have my daughter in the car," he said. "A valid excuse, a safe exit, bring her in." Saraphina replied without a second of hesitation, "The table is big enough." The offer hung in the air, a bridge between their 2 vastly different realities. Leo thought about the cold minivan, the half-empty bag of chips that was supposed to be Maya's dinner, and the look on his daughter's face when she saw this place. He knew he should say no, that it would only complicate things, that it was dangerous to blur the lines between their lives. But he also heard the genuine warmth in Saraphina's voice, a warmth that had been missing from his own life for too long. "Okay," he said. The word, feeling both like a surrender and a new beginning. Just for a little while, Maya's eyes were as wide as saucers. The moment she stepped through the front door, she spun in a slow circle, her worn sneakers silent on the polished marble floor. "Whoa," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "Is this a castle, Daddy?" Leo couldn't help but smile at her, uninhibited wonder. "Something like that, kiddo." Saraphina knelt down to Maya's level, her movements graceful and unhurried. She didn't talk down to her or use a sing-song voice. She spoke to her like an equal. "Hi Maya, I'm Sarah. It's so nice to finally meet you." Maya looked from her to her father, then back again, her expression a mixture of shyness and curiosity. "You're the sad lady." Leo shot her a warning look, but Saraphina just smiled, a genuine soft smile that reached her eyes. "I was," she said, "but I'm feeling much better now." Maya seemed to accept this, and her shyness melted away, replaced by a barrage of questions. "Do you have a dragon? Do you have a secret passage? Can I see your room?" Saraphina laughed a sound that was light and surprisingly musical. "Not yet, but we do have a kitchen with a chef who can make anything you want." Maya's jaw dropped. Anything at all. Anything at all. Leo watched the interaction with a knot of apprehension in his chest. This was exactly what he had feared, Maya seeing a life of effortless magic, a world so different from their own that their small reality would suddenly feel lacking. But as he watched Saraphina listen patiently to Maya's rambling stories about her favorite dinosaur and the time she found a frog in their old apartment's bathtub, he saw something unexpected. He didn't see a billionaire indulging a child. He saw a woman who was genuinely captivated by his daughter's spirit. The private chef, a kind-faced man named Arthur, prepared a meal that was simple at Saraphina's request: pasta with fresh tomato sauce, roasted chicken, and a salad with a light vinaigrette. It was the most delicious food Leo had eaten in years, but he barely tasted it. His attention was fixed on the two females at the table. Maya was in her element, chattering away and making Saraphina laugh with her dramatic retelling of a cartoon she'd watched last week. Saraphina, for her part, seemed to be shedding layers of her carefully constructed armor with each passing minute. Her posture relaxed. Her smile was no longer guarded, and she looked at Maya with a warmth that was both startling and deeply moving. Later, as Maya explored a nearby room filled with oversized beanbags and a startlingly large television, Saraphina turned to Leo. The firelight danced in her eyes, making them look less sad and more pensive. "She's incredible," she said quietly. "Yeah, she's my whole world," he replied, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. Saraphina nodded, looking down at her hands. "I haven't had a meal like that in years, one where people actually talked and laughed. Instead of negotiating, she looked up at him, her expression vulnerable. "You have something that all the money in the world can't buy, Leo. You have a home." He looked at Maya's small form, curled up on a beanbag, her head starting to nod with sleep, and then he looked back at the woman across the table, a woman who had everything and nothing at the same time. And for the first time he didn't see a billionaire. He just saw a person who was just as lost as he was. Just in a much bigger house. The drive back to their temporary home, a small nondescript motel on the edge of town, was quiet. Maya had fallen asleep in the back seat before they even left the mansion's long driveway, her face peaceful, and her hands still clutching a small, exquisitely crafted wooden bird that Saraphina had given her from a collection on her mantel. Leo drove slowly, the city lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of color. He couldn't shake the feeling of whiplash, the jarring transition from a world of quiet opulence to the stark reality of his own life. The minivan's heater rattled. The seat springs groaned, and the scent of damp carpet and old coffee clung to the air. He looked in the rearview mirror at his daughter's sleeping face, and a wave of guilt washed over him. Had he made a mistake by showing her that life, by daughters, letting her taste a world of effortless comfort and magic? What would she think of their small life now, of the motel rooms and the meals eaten out of styrofoam containers? He had spent years trying to shield her from the harsh realities of their situation, to create a world for her that felt safe and full of love, even when his own was crumbling. But tonight, he had willingly pulled back the curtain and exposed her to the vast chasm between their life and the lives of people. Like Saraphina Vance, he parked the van in the motel lot and sat for a long moment in the silence. The single lamp in their room cast a weak, yellow glow through the thin curtains, a stark contrast to the warm, ambient light of the mansion. He carried Maya inside her small body, warm and pliant in his arms. He tucked her into the lumpy bed, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. As he did, she stirred, murmuring something in her sleep. "Sad lady," she whispered. "Pretty house." Leo's heart clenched. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead, his touch gentle and full of a love so fierce it ached. He stood by the window for a long time, staring out at the empty parking lot. The encounter with Saraphina had unearthed something in him, a longing he had suppressed for years, a desire for stability, for a place to call home, for a partner to share the burdens and the joys. He had convinced himself that he didn't need any of that, that Maya was enough. But tonight, in the quiet of a lonely motel room, he had to admit the truth. He was tired of being alone, and the glimpse of warmth and connection he'd felt in that mansion had made the cold of his own reality feel even colder. The next few days were a blur of deliveries and restless nights. Leo tried to push the memory of Saraphina and her mansion to the back of his mind, to focus on the immediate tasks at hand, earning enough money for the next meal, the next tank of gas, the next motel room. But she lingered, a quiet presence in his thoughts. He found himself wondering what she was doing, if she was still alone in that big house. If she ever thought about him and Maya. It was a dangerous line of thinking, and he knew it. Hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. One afternoon, while waiting for a pickup at a downtown cafe, he saw her name again, this time on the cover of a financial magazine tacked to a bulletin board. The headline read, "Vance Industries, a Titan of Tech." A photo of Saraphina accompanied the article. She was dressed in a sharp power suit, her expression confident and commanding. She looked nothing like the vulnerable woman who had shared a simple meal with him and his daughter. The article detailed her rise to the top, her ruthless business acumen, her unparalleled success. It painted a picture of a woman who was untouchable, a force of nature. Leo stared at the photo, a bitter taste in his mouth that had nothing to do with the diner's coffee. This was who she really was. A titan, a queen in a world so far removed from his own that they might as well be living on different planets. The brief connection they had shared felt like a dream. Now, a strange, fleeting illusion. He had been a curiosity, a momentary diversion from her real life. A story she might tell one day about the time she slummed it with a delivery driver. The thought made his stomach churn, with a mixture of anger and shame. He crumpled the napkin in his hand and tossed it on the table. He had to forget her. He had to focus on Maya, on their life, on what was real. And Saraphina Vance, with her billions and her lonely eyes, was not his reality. He grabbed the food order and walked out of the cafe, his resolve hardening with each step. He would not let himself be a footnote in someone else's glamorous life. He had his own story to write, even if it was a small one, a quiet one, a story of survival and a father's love that was more real than any headline. Saraphina sat in her glass-walled office on the 50th floor of the Vance Industries tower. The city sprawled beneath her, a glittering tapestry of lights and ambition, but she didn't see it. Her gaze was fixed on the small wooden bird sitting on the corner of her desk, the one she had given to Maya. It was a simple thing carved with intricate detail, a testament to an artist's patience and skill. It felt out of place here, amidst the sleek lines of her minimalist office. A small piece of a different world. A world that felt more real than the one she was currently inhabiting. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about them, about Leo and Maya, about the quiet dignity with which he carried his struggles, and the unbridled joy with which his daughter met the world. Their brief time together had been a crack of light in the monotonous gray of her existence. It had reminded her of a life she had forgotten, a life where laughter wasn't scheduled and kindness wasn't a transaction. Her assistant buzzed through the intercom's Vance. "Your 2:00 is here." The board from an international conglomerate was waiting to discuss a multi-billion-dollar merger, a deal that would further solidify her company's dominance in the market. A deal she should have been excited about. But all she felt was a profound sense of emptiness. "Send them in," she said, her voice flat. She stood and smoothed her suit jacket, the practiced mask of the confident CEO slipping easily into place. She greeted the board members with a firm handshake and a polite smile, her mind already calculating strategies and projecting outcomes. But as the meeting began, her thoughts kept drifting back to a small minivan, a tired father and a little girl who had called her the sad lady. She had spent her life building an empire, a fortress of wealth and power. But she had never felt more impoverished than she did in that moment. Surrounded by success, yet starved for connection. The contrast was a physical ache in her chest. Hollow space that no amount of money or power could fill. She realized with a startling clarity that she had it all backwards. She had been chasing the wrong things. She had built a life that was impressive but not meaningful, a life that was full of everything but the one thing that truly mattered. Love. The meeting droned on a blur of charts and figures, but Saraphina was no longer listening. A decision had begun to form in her mind, a quiet rebellion against the life she had so carefully constructed. She didn't know what she was going to do yet, but she knew one thing for certain. She could not go back to the way things were. She could not continue to live in a gilded cage while her soul starved to death. The Brenger memory of a simple meal and a child's laughter had ignited a spark in her, and she was not going to let it die out. The first gift arrived without a name. It was a simple white envelope tucked under the windshield wiper of the minivan Leo found it after a long night of deliveries. As the first hint of dawn painted the sky pink and gray, inside was a gas card, preloaded with an amount that made his breath catch in his throat. There was no note, no explanation, just the card and the quiet implication of who it was. From his first instinct was pride. A hot flash of indignation that she would think he needed her charity. But then he looked at the blinking gaslight on his dashboard and the weary face of his daughter, sleeping in the back seat, and his pride faltered. He told himself it was a one-time thing, a final thank you, a closing of a chapter. He used the card, telling himself he would pay her back someday. Though he knew it was a lie, he couldn't afford to repay. But then a week later, another gift appeared. This time it was a box left at the front desk of the motel where they were staying, addressed to Maya. Inside was a collection of beautiful art supplies. High-quality paints, brushes, thick, textured paper, and a set of professional-grade colored pencils. Maya's eyes lit up with a joy so pure it was painful to watch. She spent the rest of the day creating a vibrant masterpiece, a swirling galaxy of colors and stars that she taped to the motel room wall, transforming the drab space into a gallery of her imagination. Leo watched her, a knot of conflict tightening in his gut. He knew he should put a stop to it, that he should find a way to return the gifts, to tell Saraphina that they didn't need her handouts. But how could he deny his daughter this small slice of happiness, this brief respite from their constant struggle? A few days later, a third package arrived, a brand new laptop for Leo, with the latest software, and a note that read, "A man with your mind shouldn't be limited by old tech." That was the one that broke him. It wasn't just a gift, it was a statement, a belief in his potential, a recognition of the intelligence and drive that he had long since buried under the weight of his circumstances. He sat in the dim light of the motel room, the glowing screen of the laptop illuminating his face, and he felt a wave of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very long time. Hope Saraphina was not just sending them things, she was sending them a message, a lifeline, a quiet insistence that they were not invisible, that they were seen, that they mattered. He didn't know what it meant or where it was leading, but he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. He opened a blank document and began to type, his fingers flying across the keyboard as the words poured out of him, a story of a father and a fave, daughter of loss and love of struggle and survival. A story he had been carrying inside him for years. A story that was finally ready to be told. Leo spent every spare moment on the laptop writing. He wrote in the pre-dawn hours while Maya slept. He wrote in the quiet lulls. Between deliveries, he wrote late into the night, fueled by cheap coffee and a newfound sense of purpose. The story poured out of him, a torrent of words that had been dammed up for too long. It was a fictionalized account of his life, a novel about a single father trying to raise his daughter on the road, navigating a world that was often indifferent to their struggles, but it was also a story about hope, about the kindness of strangers, and about the unexpected connections that can change the course of a life. He wrote with a raw honesty that was both painful and cathartic. He poured his grief, his fears, his love for Maya into the pages, creating a world that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. As the manuscript grew, he began to feel a shift within himself. The constant hum of anxiety that had been his companion for so long began to quiet, replaced by a sense of calm and focus. He was no longer just a delivery driver. He was a writer, a creator, a storyteller. He had found his voice again, and it was a powerful thing. One afternoon, while Maya was at a local library's free story hour, he took a leap of faith. He researched literary agents online. Using the laptop's high-speed connection to navigate a world he knew nothing about, he crafted a query letter, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. He attached the first 50 pages of his manuscript and sent it off to a handful of agents, not expecting to hear back for weeks, if at all, but to his astonishment, a reply came within hours. An agent from a prestigious New York firm was captivated by his story. She saw its potential, its heart, its universal appeal. She wanted to see the full manuscript immediately. Leo was stunned. He read the email 3 times, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. He had spent years feeling like a failure, a man who couldn't provide for his daughter, a man who had lost everything. But in that moment, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. He wasn't there yet. He knew that. But for the first time in a very long time, the road ahead didn't look like a dead end. It looked like a beginning, a new chapter in a story that was far from over. He looked over at Maya, who was now engrossed in a picture book, a small smile on her face. He knew that none of this would have been possible without Saraphina. Her quiet, anonymous gifts had not just provided them with material things, they had given him something far more valuable, the space to dream again. The agent's enthusiasm was a whirlwind of phone calls, emails, contracts. Leo felt like he had been swept up in a current that was pulling him toward a shore he had only ever dreamed of. She loved the manuscript and saw its potential, not just as a book, but as a film. She had connections in the industry, and she was confident that his story would resonate with a wide audience. It all happened so fast that Leo barely had time to process it. One minute he was a struggling delivery driver, and the next he was signing a book deal that came with an advance large enough to change their lives completely. The first thing he did was rent a small house, a cozy 2-bedroom with a small backyard and a tire swing hanging from an old oak tree. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a home. A place where Maya could have her own room. A place where they could unpack their lives and finally put down roots. Maya was overjoyed. She danced through the empty rooms, her laughter echoing off the walls. She picked out paint colors for her bedroom, a soft lavender and a deep starry blue, and she spent hours in the backyard on the tire, swing her face tilted up to the sun. Picture of pure, unadulterated happiness. Leo watched her, his heart full to bursting. This was what he had been fighting for. This was the dream he had carried in his heart for so long, but amidst the joy and relief, there was a quiet undercurrent of something else, a sense of unease, a question that lingered in the back of his mind. He knew that none of this would have happened without Saraphina. Her gifts had been the catalyst, the spark that had ignited this new chapter in their lives. But she remained a silent benefactor, a ghost in the machine of their good fortune. He didn't have her number or her address. He had no way to contact her, to thank her, to tell her what a profound impact she had had for their lives. He felt a pang of guilt, a sense of a debt, unpaid, a story left unfinished. He knew he had to find her. He had to close the loop to acknowledge the role she had played in their transformation. It wasn't just about gratitude, it was about connection, about the strange and powerful bond that had formed between them. In the quiet of a rainy night, he didn't know where to start, but he was determined to try. He owed it to her, he owed it to himself, he owed it to the story that had brought them together in the first place. Finding Saraphina Vance was not as easy as Leo had imagined. She was a ghost in the digital world, her personal information shielded by layers of corporate security and legal firewalls. He spent weeks trying to track her down, using his newfound resources to hire a private investigator. But even the investigator hit a dead end. She had seemingly vanished from public life. Her appearances at board meetings had become virtual. Her social media accounts were dormant, and her whereabouts were a closely guarded secret. It was as if she had retreated into the fortress of her wealth, leaving no trail for him to follow. Leo's frustration grew with each passing day. His book was set to be published in a few months, and the film rights had already been sold to a major studio. His life was changing at a dizzying pace. But the one person who had made it all possible was conspicuously absent. It felt wrong to celebrate his success without her, to move forward into this new life, without acknowledging the woman who had opened the door to it. He was sitting in his new study one evening, staring at a blank page on his laptop, when an idea struck him. It was a long shot, a desperate move, but it was the only one he had left. He opened a new document and began to write. Not a story this time, but a letter. A public one. An open letter to Saraphina Vance. He poured his heart out onto the page. Telling the story of their brief encounter, the anonymous gifts, the impact she had had on his and Maya's lives, he wrote about the book, the film, the new life. They were building a life that was a direct result of her quiet kindness. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't demand a response. He simply expressed his gratitude, his admiration, his desire to thank her in person. He ended the letter with a simple plea. If you're out there, if you can hear me, just know that you changed our world, and for that we will be forever grateful. He posted the letter on his author website and shared it on his newly created social media accounts. He had no idea if she would see it, if it would even reach her, but he had to try. He had to send his message out into the universe and hope that it would find its way to the woman who had become a silent and essential part of his story. The letter went viral almost overnight. It was picked up by news outlets, shared by thousands of people on social media, and became a topic of conversation on talk shows and podcasts. The story of the struggling single dad and the anonymous billionaire benefactor captured the public's imagination. It was a modern-day fairy tale, a story of kindness and connection that resonated with a world hungry for hope. Leo was overwhelmed by the response. His life was suddenly under a microscope, and he found himself thrust into a spotlight he had never sought. Reporters camped outside his house, and his phone rang off the hook with requests for interviews. He was grateful for the attention his book was getting, but he was also deeply uncomfortable with the invasion of his privacy. He had written the prime letter for one person, and one person only. And now it had become a public spectacle, a drama for the world to consume. He worried that he had made a mistake, that he had betrayed Saraphina's desire for anonymity, that he had inadvertently dragged her back into the very spotlight she had been trying to escape. But then, a few days after the letter went public, he received an email. It was from an unlisted address, and the subject line was a single word: hello. His heart pounded in his chest as he opened the message. The email was brief, just a few lines. But the words were a balm to his worried soul. "I saw your letter," it said. "Thank you for your kind words. I'm glad to know that my small gestures made a difference. I would like to see you and Maya again if you're open to it. Please. Let me know when and where would be convenient for you." It was signed. Simply as Leo read the email over and over again, a wave of relief washing over him. She wasn't angry, she wasn't upset, she wanted to see them, he replied. Immediately, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He suggested a quiet park near his new house, a neutral place away from the prying eyes of the media. She agreed, and they set a time for the following afternoon as he closed his laptop. A barred sense of peace settled over him. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a question mark. It felt like a promise, a story that was finally coming full circle, a connection that was too strong to be broken by distance or circumstance. He was ready to see her again, ready to thank her, ready to see where this strange and beautiful journey would take them. Next, the park was bathed in the warm golden light of late afternoon leaves, of red and gold, carpeted the ground, and the air was crisp with the scent of autumn. Leo sat on a bench near a small pond, watching as Maya chased a flock of pigeons, her laughter echoing through the quiet space. He was nervous, his hands were clammy, and his heart was doing a frantic dance in his chest. He had replayed this moment in his mind 100 times. But now that it was here, he felt unprepared, unmoored. Then he saw her. She was walking toward them, her figure silhouetted against the setting sun. She was dressed simply in jeans and a soft wool sweater. Her hair was down, and a pair of sunglasses rested on top of her head. She looked different from the last time he had seen her, less like a billionaire and more like a woman who had finally found her way back to herself. She stopped a few feet away from the bench, a small, hesitant smile on her face. "Hi," she said, her voice soft. Leo stood his own smile, tentative. "Hi," he replied. "Thank you for coming." She nodded. "Of course I wanted to." There was a moment of awkward silence, a space filled with all the things that had been left unsaid between them. Maya broke the spell. She ran to Saraphina and threw her arms around her legs, her face beaming with pure, unadulterated joy. "Missed you," she said, her voice muffled against Saraphina's sweater. "I missed you too, sweetheart," Saraphina replied, her voice thick with emotion. She knelt down and hugged Maya tightly, her eyes closing for a moment, as if she were savoring to feel of the small arms around her. Leo watched them, a lump forming in his throat. The connection between them was palpable, a bond that had been forged in a moment of shared vulnerability and had only grown stronger with time. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the park, walking along the winding paths, talking and laughing like old friends. They didn't talk about the money or the gifts or the media frenzy. They talked about books and movies and Maya's latest obsession. With dinosaurs, it was easy and natural, and for the first time, Leo felt like he could finally breathe again. As the sun began to set, they found themselves back at the bench by the pond. The sky was a canvas of fiery orange and deep purple, and the water reflected the colors, like a mirror. Saraphina turned to Leo, her expression serious. "I need to apologize," she said, "for disappearing, for not telling you who I was." Leo shook his head. "You don't have to, I understand you needed to." "Protect yourself from my world," she said. "But in doing so, I almost lost the one thing that mattered, your friendship." He met her, gaze his own eyes full of a deep and unwavering affection. "You never lost it," he said softly. "It was always there, waiting for you to come back." A slow smile spread across her face, a smile that reached her eyes and lit them up from within. "I'm back," she said, "and this time I'm not going anywhere." The words hung in the air, a promise, a commitment, new. Beginning, they sat in comfortable silence, for a long moment watching as Maya skipped rocks across the surface of the pond. The future was still uncertain, but in that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the setting sun and the warmth of a connection that had weathered the storm, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Leo's book was published to critical acclaim and quickly became a bestseller. The film adaptation went into production with a cast of A-list actors, and Leo found himself traveling to film sets and press junkets. A life he had never imagined for himself. But through it all, he remained grounded, his focus always on Maya and the quiet life they had built together. Saraphina was a constant presence in their lives. She was no longer a silent benefactor, but an active participant, a cherished friend, a member of their small family. She attended Maya's school plays and soccer games. She helped Leo navigate the strange new world of fame, fortune. And she was always there with a listening ear and a steady hand. They spent weekends at the small house. Leo had rented their days filled with simple pleasures, walks in the park, movie nights with popcorn and board games that always ended in laughter. Saraphina seemed to revel in the normalcy of it all. The quiet moments of connection that had been so absent from her previous life. She had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of her company, delegating much of the responsibility to a trusted team of executives. She was still the CEO, but she was no longer a slave to the relentless demands of her empire. She had found a balance, a way to be both a titan of industry and a woman who had time for the people and things that truly mattered. One evening as they sat on the porch, swing watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, Saraphina turned to Leo, her eyes shining in the soft light. "You know, I used to think that happiness was something you achieved," she said, "that it was a destination you arrived at after a long and arduous journey." He smiled. "What do you think?" Now she leaned her head on his shoulder, her hand finding his in the dark. "I think it's a choice." She said a series of small moments of connection, of kindness, of love. "I think it's this." He looked at her, at the woman who had walked into his life and turned it upside down in the most beautiful way possible, and he knew that she was right. Happiness wasn't a destination, it was a journey, and he was so grateful to be on it with her. The air in the small theater was thick with anticipation. The lights dimmed and a hush fell over the crowd as the opening credits of the film began to roll. Leo sat in the front row with Maya on one side and Saraphina on the other. His heart was pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. This was it, the culmination of a journey that had started with a single act of kindness on a rainy night. The film was a faithful adaptation of his book, a moving and powerful story that captured the heart and soul of his experience. The actors who played him and Maya were brilliant, their performances so real and raw that at times Leo felt like he was watching a home movie. He squeezed Saraphina's hand, his own eyes welling with tears. She squeezed back her own emotions, a mirror of his. When the final scene faded to black, the theater was silent for a moment, a collective breath held in the darkness. Then the applause began, a thunderous wave of appreciation that washed over them, filling the room with a palpable sense of joy and catharsis. Leo, Maya, and Saraphina stood to their feet, the spotlight finding them in the Gyre-item front row. The applause grew louder, a standing ovation for the man whose story had touched so many hearts. Leo looked at Maya, whose face was beaming with pride, and then at Saraphina, whose eyes were shining with love and gratitude. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth and admiration of the crowd, he felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. He had not just written a story, he had lived it, and he had come out on the other side, stronger, wiser, and more grateful than they had ever thought possible. After the premiere, they walked out into the cool night air, the city lights twinkling around them like a sea of diamonds. They didn't go to the star-studded after-party. Instead, they went to a small, quiet diner. The kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that was more bitter than bold. They slid into a booth in the back, away from the prying eyes of the world, and ordered a plate of pancakes to share, just like they had done so many times before. As they ate, they talked and laughed, their conversation easy and natural, a testament to the deep and abiding bond that had formed between them. They were no longer a struggling delivery driver and a lonely billionaire. They were a family, a small and unconventional one, but a family nonetheless. They had found their way to each other through a series of happy accidents and quiet acts of kindness, and they had built a life together that was more beautiful and too meaningful than either of them could have imagined. As they left the diner and walked out into the night, Saraphina turned to Leo, her smile radiant in the soft glow of the streetlights. "You know," she said, "I think this is the best premiere I've ever been to?" He smiled back, his own heart full to bursting. "Me too," he said. "Me too." The sun cast a warm golden glow over the backyard of the small house that had become their home. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree, and the scent of freshly cut grass hung in the air. Leo and Saraphina sat on the porch, swinging their hands, intertwined their shoulders, touching as they watched Maya play on the tire swing. Her laughter, a joyful melody that filled the quiet afternoon. She was older now, on the cusp of her teenage years, but she still had the same bright spirit, the same infectious joy that had captivated Saraphina from the very beginning. Leo's second book had just been published, another bestseller, and the film adaptation was already in the works. He had become a celebrated author, a storyteller, whose words had the power to move and inspire, but he had never lost sight of what truly mattered: his family, his home, his quiet life of love and connection. Saraphina had transformed her company from the inside out, implementing policies that prioritized employee well-being and community involvement. She had become a new kind of CEO, one who led with her heart as well as her head. She had found a way to be both powerful and compassionate, a force for good in a world that so desperately needed it. They had built a life together that was a beautiful blend of their two worlds, a life of quiet moments and grand adventures, of simple pleasures and profound love. They had a home that was filled with laughter and books and the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. They had a family that was built on a foundation of trust, respect, and a deep and abiding affection. They were a testament to the power of kindness, to the magic of connection, to the idea that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, Saraphina leaned her head on Leo's shoulder, her heart full of a quiet contentment. "I love you," she whispered. He kissed the top of her head, his own heart overflowing with a love so deep it was almost painful. "I love you too," he said, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching as their daughter swung higher and higher, her silhouette framed against the setting sun, a perfect ending to a story that had started with a simple delivery to the wrong address. A story that was still being written, a story that was proof that sometimes the most beautiful fairy tales are the ones that are real. He just wanted to give his daughter one night to feel like a princess. But when the maitre d' turned them away for looking too poor, everyone in the restaurant stayed silent, except for the mysterious woman at the back table who stood up, crossed the room, and changed their lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The rain had let up just enough for the clouds to hang heavy and low, smearing the sky. In a dull gray that matched the concrete beneath his boots, Cole Morgan stood on the edge of the sidewalk, holding the passenger door open as his daughter Laya carefully stepped out of their faded sedan. She was dressed in a soft lavender dress he'd found at a second-hand store 3 weeks ago. He'd spent an hour sewing up a loose hem the night before her hair was braided, just the way she liked it, and she clutched a tiny handmade purse to her chest like it was treasure. Cole tugged at the collar of his button-up, one of only two he owned, that didn't have oil stains. He had pressed it that morning with a damp towel and an iron that sparked every time it plugged into the wall. His boots were clean, scuffed, but polished. His hands, rough from years under hoods and gears, still bore the signs of a working man, no matter how much soap he'd scrubbed into them. He looked up at the glowing gold script above the door. La Fontainette was the kind of place people whispered about in his town, the kind of place reserved for celebrations with fine wine and reservations booked weeks in advance. But tonight wasn't about indulgence. It was about a little girl who deserved to feel like the world had magic in it. She had turned 9, and she wanted to feel like a princess. As they stepped inside, the warmth of the restaurant hit them immediately, rich aromas of truffle oil and roasted duck candlelight flickering off. Crystal glassware conversations were soft, refined. Waiters glided across the floor in pressed uniforms. Cole glanced around, gently guiding Laya toward the front desk. The maitre d' saw them before they said a word. His eyes scanned. Cole's thrifted shirt lingered a second too long on Laya's simple dress, then flicked back up to Cole's unshaven jaw. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Can I help you?" the man asked, already knowing the answer he intended to. Cole straightened. "We have a reservation for Morgan's 7:0. The maitre d' glanced at the book, then closed it with a snap. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake. We have no record of that." Cole's brow furrowed. "I called 3 days ago. Spoke to someone named Rachel." "Rachel? No longer works here," the man said coolly, "and even if she did, we have a strict dress code." He said it slowly, like each word was meant to bruise. Cole glanced down at Laya, who was looking up at him with a confused smile. She didn't understand yet, but he did. He understood completely, and his stomach dropped. Cole clenched his jaw, but he forced a calm smile for Laya's sake. She was still holding his hand, still hopeful, still believing in the magic of birthday wishes and fancy. Restaurants with sparkling chandeliers. He couldn't let it all crash down. Not yet. There must be some way. Cole started, but the maitre d' raised a hand, not with kindness but dismissal. "We're at full capacity this evening," he said with syrupy politeness that dripped with condescension. "Even if your name were in the book, which it isn't, I'm afraid we cannot seat guests who fail to meet our dress code." Laya looked up at her dad. "Did we do something wrong?" The words pierced Cole deeper than he expected. She wasn't crying, but her voice was small now, fragile, like she was beginning to understand that sometimes the world doesn't work the way it should, not even on your birthday. "No, sweetheart," Cole said, crouching to meet her eyes. "You look beautiful. You did everything perfect behind them." Someone laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, but enough for Cole to hear the snide amusement in it. A couple dressed in sleek black and deep red passed by. Giving him a once-over, he could feel the judgment crawling over his back like static. His face flushed with heat, he stood turning back to the maitre d', who now wore the expression of someone tolerating a nuisance. "I just wanted one nice night for her. That's all," Cole said, voice low, steady. "She's 9, it's her birthday." The maitre d' leaned in just a little, lowering his tone to something meant only for Cole, "And that's very sweet. But if you want your daughter to enjoy a place like this, maybe start by bringing her somewhere that fits your bracket." Cole's hand curled into a fist. Before he could think for a second, the thought flared. Just one punch, just enough to wipe that smug smirk off his face. But then Laya tugged his sleeve. "Dad, it's okay," she whispered. She was trying to be brave, to protect him from feeling bad. He swallowed hard, blinking away the burn in his eyes. "Come on, kiddo," he said softly. "Let's find another place." But before he could turn toward the door, a voice from behind them cut through the tension like a blade dipped in honey. "Excuse me," it said, calm, poised, unmistakably powerful. "I believe you made a mistake." And every eye in the room turned. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, the kind that makes every clink of silverware sound like thunder. Cole turned, startled, and saw her standing there. The woman's presence hit harder than her words. She was tall, elegant, with a tailored emerald dress that shimmered beneath the ambient light like forest leaves in moonlight. Her hair was swept back in a low knot, her makeup soft but flawless. Her posture regal without being arrogant. She wasn't just beautiful, she was commanding. The maitre d' blinked. And for a moment the mask slipped. "Miss Davenport," he stammered, tone suddenly deferential. I was watching," she said, cutting him off with the kind of politeness that left no room for argument. "And I'd like to clarify something. This man and his daughter were just turned away for not being dressed appropriately." The maitre d' straightened his spine, desperate to regain control. "I was merely following policy." "Then, perhaps your policy needs re-examination," she said flatly. Her gaze never left his face because the only thing I saw was a father trying to do something kind for his child, and a little girl who looked like she belonged in a fairy tale. Cole didn't know what to say. He felt Laya's small hand tighten around his. Her eyes were wide now, not with confusion but wonder. "Please," the woman continued, turning toward Cole. Her voice softened, but her eyes stayed sharp. "Won't you? Join me. My table is right over there. There's plenty of room." Cole's mouth opened, then closed. He felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. We don't want to intrude," he said quietly, instinctively, shielding Laya. "From more embarrassment, it wouldn't be an intrusion," she said gently. "It would be an honor." The maitre d' stood frozen, caught between protocol and power. Miss Davenport gave him a look that made her expectations clear, without another word. He stepped aside. Cole hesitated for just a moment longer, then looked down at Laya. Her face was glowing, not just with joy, but with hope. "Okay," he said, his voice low, still uncertain. "If you're sure, I'm sure," the woman replied, smiling. "Now, come. The night is young, and no little girl should feel small on her birthday." And with that, she led them through the restaurant. Not as guests being tolerated, but as people worth noticing. The clink of glasses and murmur of hushed conversation returned slowly as they crossed the restaurant floor. But the air still carried a crackle, the kind that follows a sudden shift in power. Cole could feel the eyes on his back, curious, judgmental, some even embarrassed for having watched the scene unfold. Without lifting a finger, he kept his gaze ahead, trying to match the pace of the woman who'd just intervened in his worst moment with effortless poise. They arrived at a round corner table, draped in cream linen and bathed in the warm glow of a nearby chandelier. Laya's eyes lit up. A candle flickered gently in the center of the table, surrounded by delicate porcelain dishes and folded napkins that looked too fancy to touch. "Here," the woman said softly, pulling out a chair for Laya. "This seat is reserved for the table." "Birthday girl." Laya hesitated, looking to her father, who nodded. She slid into the chair, her posture suddenly more upright, as if trying to match the elegance around her. Cole took the seat across from her, his hands stiff in his lap, heart still racing. The woman sat last, unhurried, as though none of what just happened had shaken her. "Thank you," Cole said finally, his voice quiet but raw. "You didn't have to do that." "No," she agreed, "but someone did." She reached for the wine list and paused. "Ava Davenport," she said, extending a graceful hand across the table. "Cole Morgan," he replied, shaking it lightly, still unsure if any of this was real. A waiter appeared seconds later, suddenly, far more attentive than before. Ava spoke first. "We'll start with sparkling water and a Shirley Temple. Extra cherries for our guest of honor." Laya beamed her fingers now, toying with the edges of her napkin. The waiter nodded, retreating swiftly. Ava turned back to Cole. "I know what it's like to grow up being told you don't belong in places like this," she said. Her voice quieter now, almost as if she was speaking to herself. "But I also know what it means when someone holds a door open." Anyway, Cole looked across the table at his daughter, smiling now, eyes wide with awe, and felt something shift. He didn't know what this night was turning into, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like he was carrying the weight alone.